out there. So as you know, and many people may or may not know, I started in 1997 as a real estate developer doing short-term rentals back before, being Airbnb and
Right.
VRBO was a thing. I can't remember when VRBO started, but they were first building multi-million dollar, resort destination beach houses. And what's pretty interesting about the business back then versus now is it wasn't as popular as it is now. Like, short-term rentals are just like a meme now. Everybody wants to get into them
Right.
and they've become a different thing. But back then it was really interesting because I was building ground up exclusively on short-term rentals. I mean, some we were buying and putting pools in and ground floors, like the houses were all built on pilings at the beach. So the ground floor was generally open. So we'd go in and close that in, create like a rec room, another bedroom, then we put a pool in, and that would increase the rental income generally by $30,000 to $50,000 a year on a house and really cover a lot of the costs. Some houses had added about 100 grand to the income if it was oceanfront. But anyways, long story short, when I was building them new to sell, because I built to sell, I didn't want to keep
Right.
anything. You had to have a year's worth of income behind the property for people to want to buy them. They wanted to see that this house was proven, that it would generate the income. So they were always worth more after a year once you had a good year's full of income. But most people wouldn't buy a brand new, short-term rental unit from me or anybody else that was building them until they had at least 1 year, full season under
Yeah.
it, which is really interesting.
They like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they wouldn't even let you, there would, no lender would offer any financing if it didn't have at least a year or two, even if it was a built property. And now it's like you have a lot of different lenders, even in the commercial space, that are maybe coming from like RV parks or like micro resort communities that are saying, hey, we'll finance these type of projects with no income. Just like a track record essentially is what they look for.
Yeah, they do projected income. And see, we weren't able to use that. We had to
Right.
finance them based on our balance sheet. And, I was paying 9.75% interest on my construction loans back then.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No,
I
it's
mean, I
funny.
had
That's why like
$100,000 a
people
month
freak
going out in interest payments at one point.
people freaking out about interest rates now. And one of my investors was like, man, my first mortgage I ever got in the 80s was at 14%. I was like, okay, that makes me feel a little better.
Yeah. 5, 6% was good back, not too long ago. Yeah. It's
Right,
just, people have been really spoiled here the last few years, and especially
right,
people that have just gotten into the industry with the markets, everything. People didn't go through 2008 and 9. They've got a very skewed view of,
right.
how things
So,
can go. But,
right.
the
Clear
other thing
skies
was
and
too, that's really changed now is that it used to be almost exclusively like resort kind of areas where you did short-term
right.
rentals. Now you can put one almost anywhere, and people just
Anywhere.
want to
I
go
was just thinking about
explore
that this morning.
different
Yep.
geographies and just kind of look at and do different things. But one thing you might want to think about, anybody watching, if you're going to do this, is you might want to start looking at major sporting events. Like I saw a post the other day of a guy that's got a property out in Arizona where the Super Bowl is going to be this year, and he booked $250,000 on a high-end luxury rental property for the 2 weeks of the Super Bowl, two different properties.
Yeah.
So if you target areas where maybe the Olympics are coming internationally, as well as in
Yeah.
this country, where major sporting events are going to be, even some minor sporting events like travel leagues for, baseball or soccer or lacrosse or whatever, those will do very well too. So different
Another
business model now than it was, back when I first got started.
And it's interesting too because a lot of markets are being made because of short-term rentals. I was just talking to someone out of New York, and he was telling me like back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, like the Catskills of upstate New York was nothing, and now it's like a prime short-term rental area. And when I talk about this in the course, you might not think your market is unique, and it might not, maybe your look grass is greener on the other side, but what I always say is try to think of a place where people in your market like to take a weekend or maybe an extended weekend vacation, and that might be the market. It might not be the exact market you're currently in, but if it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes away, an hour away, those markets, those little pockets exist everywhere in the country and internationally as well.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And, from a construction standpoint, as we know, the housing inventory is pretty limited in a lot of areas. That's starting to correct a little bit in some areas,
Right.
but it's still pretty tight in most areas. And with the interest rates rising and the real estate market shifting, that's going to create an opportunity in new construction. So when I started in the business, that was the big issue, was resale properties were more expensive, just like you found. So it was cheaper to buy land and build new than it was to buy existing. So that's why building, generally that's when it makes more sense to build, is when you can build cheaper than you can buy, or when there's no inventory. So we're going to see land prices start to come down because land is always the slowest moving segment of the market in most areas when housing is correcting.
Working because things are changing every 6 months, every 3 months, things are changing right now.
especially in technology, but just that, like I said, the way the business has evolved in and of itself, going from like the business I started in where, it was week to week, you had to check in on a Sunday, check
Right.
out on a Saturday, that kind of thing, to now with short-term rentals, what we're seeing, especially over the last couple of years, is people booking last minute versus well in advance, like a year in advance, down on the beach. And you still have to, if you want that house for the same time next year, you have to book while you're there. But most short-term rentals now, I mean, people are booking last minute, they're booking shorter stays, and they're experimenting more and trying out different locations. Like I said, some of them are like in the middle of nowhere, and people are like, I'm fine, I want to go stay in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's funny that so the person that helped me integrate all the technology when it comes to putting this course together, he was like, "Hey man, I just purchased this 48-acre parcel in Canada, like 3 hours away from Toronto." And he's like, "I'm gonna purchase your course because like my brother and I just built they built two small cabins on this 48-acre parcel." And he's like, "We just listed one of them and like we're like booked out like 70% already the first month." And this was this is in the middle of nowhere. There's no running water. It's just a cabin with like an outhouse. And I was like, I guess there's a need for it if the dude who's helping me put together the technology wants the course. So yeah.
Well, I didn't even really thought about it, but where I was at on the Outer Banks, we had the ocean, we had the sound, like a bay area, and there
Yeah.
were these little
Beautiful area,
marsh
by the way.
islands, and people
Yeah,
were
yeah.
building these little fish shacks on these marsh islands. So it's like that, no, running water or anything, but they had electricity going to them, and you take a boat out to them and just kind of hang out and fish. That would have been neat to kind of do some Airbnbs on some of those. They may be doing it, for all I know right now, but
I know there's an island going up in Hilton Head where you have to take a ferry to the island to get to the short-term rental. It's almost like my wife and I had stayed in the Maldives where like you need a boat to get to the resort. And it's
yeah,
the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
the water huts.
Yeah. The water huts. It's
Great
cool.
start
It
to the
was trippy
Maldives.
at night though. People don't know whoever stays in those huts, those things move at night a lot because a lot of wind off the water.
Yeah.
My wife woke up and was like, call the front desk right now because this thing's about to fall in the water. I was like, no, they need to they shift a lot at night.
Yeah, yeah. So do the houses on the beach that I build
Right.
because they're on pilings and they move. Even if you enclose the ground floor, they still move quite a bit with the winds down there. But the ones that aren't enclosed in the bottom, they dance.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
And like I said, we're going to post a link to the video so people can go sign up when it's available. And man, it looks fantastic. Lots of information and the resources. I'm sure you have all the new online automation
Yep.
technology resources listed as well and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just like with anything, like the goal of the business is to be able to work on the business, not in it. So, I mean, automation is like my number one thing is, I mean, you know me, like I run a pretty lean team. I have almost nobody on staff. I have GCs that work for me, management, like cleaning companies that work for me. But I talk about that in the course of like, you can build a 8-figure business with running a pretty lean team. I mean, you run a pretty lean team as well. So, yeah,
Yeah, I learned that over the years. I mean, that's kind of the way I always operated. Even when I had bigger teams, it was still, I wasn't working in the business at any given
exactly.
moment. I had people running it. But what's really cool about this too is the numbers. So that's what's really changed too, is that, that was really what was really interesting about what you're doing and some other people that working with some other areas doing short-term rentals is, the income that you can generate, net income on your cost base is very different in my world because beach
Yeah.
properties are expensive. But the stuff that people are doing now in these other areas where you got 2, 3, 400,000 all in, and you're generating over 100,000 a year in income is just nuts.
Yeah, like we built our first A-frame turnkey for about 220,000 with land and furnishings. That one was 830 square foot, and that one netted us about 48,000 in income, and then it grossed 84,000.
Yeah,
Um,
so it grossed 84, net 40 something after debt service.
after everything, yeah, after
Okay, so
debt
to put
service,
that in
everything.
perspective, where my areas, like the beaches in most areas of the country and the beaches, to get 80,000 to $100,000 a year in annual income, you're going to have to spend 1.2 million to get that. So, I mean, you can buy
5x, yeah.
yeah 4 or 5 of what you're doing for that same dollar, and that was the problem with our areas. It's you don't make any money. They
Yeah,
break even.
and
They're annuities. They're great. You get to use them, but they're
yeah.
not cash cows like the stuff that you can do in these other areas now.
Yeah, and it's like the mountain markets, and again, we talk about it in the course, but it's like some of these more rural markets as well, where you have a unique property in the mountains or somewhere in the woods, is that they're a little bit less seasonal, where people like to stay in them in the winter, where the property becomes the attraction itself in the winter during the down season, and then the city and the market itself becomes the attraction during the high season, the summer or the leaf season.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, Alex, thanks for taking a few minutes out and sharing the course with us. And man, I know it's going to help a lot of people.
Appreciate it, brother.
Talk to you soon.